Hi Year 10, today we're going to be looking at the presentation on vegetarianism. This is in your booklet and you will need to turn to that page now. It is inside your pink booklet. Now if we have a look at the syllabus link, we can see here that lifestyle choices is definitely classified in two ways. So we did cover athletes already, and today our presentation will look at vegetarians. Now the main thing we have to remember is what the syllabus is asking us to do, and it is saying to investigate the effects of lifestyle on food needs. Now when we do look at effects, it is looking at, or it's alluding to that verb of explain, which is to relate cause and effect. So we really need to have an understanding by the end of this lecture and the subsequent activities of the effects of being a vegetarian on food needs and different dietary choices. Now we will skip this Kahoot, but I will make a link of this on the Google Classroom if you wanted to explore it. And this video is also another good one to watch, and I'll link that onto the Google Classroom for you to have a look at. It is a 5-minute video. So to start off with, let's define vegetarianism. So vegetarians are people who prefer not to eat meat for various reasons. So it isn't a dietary requirement. It is not linked to requirements that the individual has. It's basically a personal preference. And it is a choice that people make, and it is becoming more and more common in our society. Now this is exemplified through the little box of information at the bottom here, where it says between 2012 and 2016, the number of Australian adults whose diet was almost vegetarian or completely vegetarian had risen from 1.7 million to 2.1 million people. Now, I just want you to stop and think about why some people might actually be adopting a vegetarian diet. Now, there is a lot of research coming out about plant-based eating and the positive effects it does have on health. There are lots and lots of documentaries on platforms such as Netflix, as well as ClickView, YouTube, which are showing the effects of taking meat and meat products out of the diet. Now, it's important when watching these documentaries and videos that often only one side of an argument is presented, and sometimes it might be a subjective view. So it is sometimes interesting to watch these things, but it's also very important to make sure that you've got the whole picture, because there are both positive and negative effects of having a vegetarian diet. Now, when we talk about vegetarianism, there are 5 key types of vegetarianism. The first type is becoming a vegan. Now, a vegan is the strictest form of vegetarianism. And a vegan is someone who has a diet that's consistent with only plant foods. So they will only have cereal products like Sultana bran and any wheat-based products like Weet Bix. They will have legumes. So legumes are things like beans and chickpeas. They will consume nuts, seeds, fruits, and also vegetables. So it's important to understand the definition for a vegan. The next type of vegetarianism is lacto-vegetarian. And the way that I like to remember this is through this first prefix, lacto. So lacto alludes to something being milk-based. So somebody who is a lacto-vegetarian is somebody who does not include meat or eggs, but they do include milk and milk products. So they do have a combination of what a vegan consumes as well as milk and milk products, but they still eliminate meat and eggs from the diet. Now, if we have a look at the third type of vegetarianism, we can see here that it is lacto-ovo-vegetarian. Now, same rule of thumb applies. Lacto means that milk and milk products are permitted, but ovo does allude to something being an egg-based. So someone who is lacto-ovo-vegetarian has a diet that does not include meat, fish, or poultry, but it's basically a combination of what a vegan consumes, so plant-based foods like cereals, legumes, nuts, seeds, fruits, and vegetables, in addition to milk, milk products, and eggs. Now, if we think about some milk products are things like custard, cheese, ice cream, yogurt. Now, we've had a look at the first 3 types of vegetarianism. So let's move on to our next slide, where we have a look at the last 2 types of vegetarianism. So pesco-vegetarian. Someone who is a pesco-vegetarian has all of the vegetable-based products, plants, like vegetables and fruits, but they also consume fish and seafood. Okay, so they're the only meat products that they consume. The final type of vegetarian is a polo-vegetarian. Now, this is somebody who excludes all red meat. So, red meat can include beef, pork, and lamb, but they do include poultry, which is things like chicken, turkey, etc. And they do also have white meat, so fish. So, they do exclude red meat products, but they allow white meat. Now, there are many different reasons for becoming a vegetarian, and it is a very individual choice and it depends upon the person. Now, the first reason might be that it does assist in maintaining a healthy lifestyle and prevents the development of dietary disorders. So, having a plant based diet naturally does exclude a lot of saturated fat. Now, sat fats are our bad fats that come from animal products, so things like bacon with the bacon rind and the fat on there. A lot of eggs, milk and dairy have a lot of saturated fat, especially those that are full cream, as well as beef, which is obviously, and lamb, which are high sources of fat. So preventing diet-related disorders is one of the main reasons that somebody might choose to have a plant-based diet. The next reason is compassion for animals. So that concern for animal welfare and really considering the treatment of animals and the inhumane treatment that does occur a lot in the food industry, not necessarily in Australia but definitely overseas, is another reason for people adopting a vegetarian diet. Environmental concerns is another big one, and obviously the degradation that the agricultural industry has on our land. Agriculture is one of the biggest pollutants for carbon emissions and one of the biggest reasons why we do have global warming in Australia and around the world. And beef and cattle and animals do contribute a lot of methane and a lot of other gases into our environment, which does leave negative environmental impacts. So if people are very concerned about the environment, particularly global warming and the effects of agriculture, then some individuals might choose to avoid eating these foods that do cause these negative environmental impacts. And the last one is the religious and spiritual beliefs. So if we think about different religious traditions, we've got religions like Islam, we have Hindu, we have Buddhism, we have Christianity. A lot of these religions have strict dietary laws, and we will be covering this in a few lessons' time. But a good example would be, for example, Islamic people do not consume pork or pork products because it is one of their religious beliefs and one of their strict laws that they need to follow. Another good example is Christians. We don't eat meat on Ash Wednesday, Good Friday, or any other days of fasting, particularly during the Lenten season. So people adopting a vegetarian diet during these times is often driven by religious beliefs. Now, there are a range of benefits which allude to the positive implications of vegetarianism, and we're going to have a look at those now. So, having lower rates of heart disease, which is cardiovascular disease, diabetes type 2, and bowel cancer are one of the really, really prominent effects of having a plant-based or a vegetarian diet. So heart disease, we know, is also known as cardiovascular disease, and this is one of the leading causes of death in Australia. It is the leading cause of death and around the world. Now, by not having animal products, we are reducing our saturated fat intake, which means that we are going to lower our risk of heart disease, arteriosclerosis, stroke, heart attack, and hypertension. Diabetes type 2, we know that that disease does link to having a lot of visceral fat or internal fat around the pancreas, as well as having a lot of fat in our bodily cells, which does inhibit the production of insulin from the pancreas. So this is something that we have already discussed when we learned about those lifestyle disorders. So that is another negative effect or positive effect of adopting a plant-based diet, the fact that the rates of diabetes type 2 do reduce. Bowel cancer is another one. So have a think about why bowel cancer would be reduced for a moment. Now, it all comes down to fiber, and having a vegetarian diet means that you are consuming a lot of plant-based foods So things like legumes, things like grains, things like cereals, fruits and vegetables, these are naturally high in fiber and therefore they do aid in bowel movements and digestion, thus reducing the risks of bowel cancer. The next point links to hypertension, and we know that vegetarians are less likely to have high blood pressure or even high cholesterol. Now, the reason why is that cholesterol does come from our saturated fats. So, saturated fats are from animals, and by not having animal products, we do naturally reduce our risk for having high cholesterol. Now, the next example that we can see is that vegetarians do tend to be slimmer. So they are able to naturally manage their weight a little bit better than people who have meat in their diet and animal products. Vegetarians also have a longer life expectancy than non-vegetarians, and this means that they do live longer. The next example links back to bowel cancer. Vegetarians generally consume more fiber, and they do have a diet that is higher in essential vitamins, particularly vitamin C, which is sourced from fruits. A really good source is oranges as well as strawberries and our native Kakadu plum. Vitamin E and also vitamin B9, which is also known as folic acid. So these come from lots and lots of leafy greens, and our vitamin E comes commonly from lots of nuts. So we've had a look at the benefits of vegetarians, but now we're going to have a look at some of the negative effects of being a vegetarian, which means the risks. Now, anemia. We know that anemia is a lifestyle disorder and it does link to somebody not having enough iron in the diet. Now, vegetarians are naturally at a greater risk for having anemia because iron is often sourced and heme iron is sourced from our animal products like red meat. So by not having red meat and other meat products in the diet, which are good sources of heme iron, someone who is vegetarian is at risk of developing this disease of undernutrition. The next disease or diet-related disorder that somebody who is a vegetarian is at greater risk of developing is osteoporosis. So osteoporosis is a lack of vitamin D, vitamin K, as well as phosphorus and calcium. Now, calcium does come from predominantly milk and milk-based products like dairy, cheese, yogurt, milk, ice cream, custard, etc. Now, if somebody is a strict vegetarian, such as a vegan, then they are not consuming milk-based products. Therefore, their natural intake of calcium is decreased. Therefore, they do have a greater risk of developing osteoporosis later on in life. This, coupled with a reduced intake of vitamin D, which does help to synthesize bone and form bone tissue, vitamin K, as well as phosphorus, these all contribute to a greater risk of osteoporosis, particularly later on in life when it's commonly developed. Other examples of risks or the negative implications of being a vegetarian is the first one relating to the fact that meat, if it is not included in the diet, then the individual is at risk of getting enough iron, zinc, and protein. So vegetarians need to make sure they are designing their diets really carefully to ensure that they are getting the correct proportions of nutrients included. So if somebody is eliminating meat, they need to think of what foods are great sources of iron, zinc, and protein to ensure they are getting adequate amounts. In order to do that, vegetarians need to have complementary proteins. So complementary proteins are where there are two or more incomplete protein sources that together provide all the essential amino acids. Now, it's important to understand that there are two sources of protein. There are complete proteins and there are incomplete proteins. Now, complete proteins are those that contain all the essential amino acids, whereas incomplete proteins are those that do not contain all the essential amino acids. Complete proteins come from animal products such as meat. Incomplete proteins come from plant-based products like nuts and seeds. The only exception is that soy is a complete protein and it is an animal. It is a plant-based product. So if somebody is vegetarian, the best way to make sure they are getting all the essential amino acids in their diet is to ensure that they are ingesting 2 or more incomplete proteins in one meal, which therefore forms a complementary protein, which means that all the amino acids are added up to therefore make those 2 incomplete proteins a complete protein. We can see this really carefully here. So complete proteins contain all the essential amino acids, whereas incomplete proteins are missing at least one of them. Can you please make sure you are annotating your slides now with that information on what a complete protein and what an incomplete protein is? Now, vegetarians would need to create their own complete proteins, and these are called complementary proteins. So if we have a look, a complementary protein is one where all of the amino acids are combined and they are provided through 2 food sources. So a good example, as we can see here, is that the whole grain brown rice is a source of protein, lentils are a source of protein, and by combining these 2 incomplete proteins together, they do form a complementary protein. We can see the same for the next example. So if a vegetarian would like to get a complete protein, they might like to have beans with a whole grain, or even better, hummus with whole grain crackers. A great snack for somebody who is vegetarian because it does ensure they are getting all the essential acids. Now this here just quickly shows what a vegetarian food pyramid would look like, and you'll notice here that there is no allocation of meat, dairy or any of these products within the pyramid. So predominantly their food energy intake does come from what is here on the bottom section of this pyramid. So whole grain breads, pastas, cereals and rice. Eating these liberally means they are eating them in high quantities. The next food group for them is our vegetables and our fruits. These need to be eaten generously. Legumes, nuts, seeds and meat alternatives, as well as non-fat dairy products, if the person can have milk products, should be eaten in a moderate amount. And then just like the typical Australian Guide to Healthy Eating, an individual who is a vegetarian should only be having vegetable fats, oils, sweets and salt in very sparingly or small quantities. The lecture has now finished. Please ensure you have annotated over the slides, highlighted the key information and added notes based on what I have said, and move on now to the next activity to build your knowledge and understanding of vegetarianism. Thanks for listening.